my heart still belongs to Mexico. The ages that I spent in Mexico from 6 to about 11 were the years where, I don't know, somehow your heart got filled up. The music that to me is most moving is Mexican ranchera music. And I venture to say, if you ask anybody what is the music they deeply love, they would tell you kind of like what shaped them and at what age that happened. So I love Mexico. We adopted our son from Mexico when he was 8 days old. We wanted Mexico to be part of his experience growing up. So my wife and I would go to Mexico every year with him. We continue to go to Mexico now. We have friends there, almost lifelong friends. As for what has changed about Mexico, it developed a middle class. Between the time I was a kid and the time I went back to Mexico as an adult, all of a sudden there was this extra appendage to the economy, and it was a middle class. And the middle class brings in even more of America, all the consumer goods. So you'd start to see dishpan antennas, you'd see sneakers on people's feet, you'd see clothing. In Mexico, when I was there, you could, as a boy, you could go without any pants, any underpants until the age of about 6 or 7.
Wow.
That was poverty speaking. There was the smell of deep frying and dirt wherever you went in Mexico. You don't find that now. But the other thing about Mexico, which I don't think has changed, is that unlike the US, it is a traditional society. That means that people are all together based upon certain deep habits that they have, big families, that sense of hospitality, that sense that corruption, official corruption is not corruption, it's part of the economy. Everybody bribes everybody because that's where half of their income comes from. And for the longest time, one party ruled the country. Now it goes under a different name, but I think it's still the same arrangement. There's now a Jewish woman who's the president of Mexico. And I've talked to Mexicans and I said, well, what do you think about having a Jew? And it's almost like you're saying, well, what do you think about this person having 2 eyes in their head and 2 arms and 2 legs? It's not a factor in Mexico. As a Jew, I never ran into anti-Semitism when I was growing up in Mexico. So that's remained the same. And also they think that just because she's a woman doesn't mean that she won't be just as corrupt as her predecessor. So, I once talked to a guy who did business in Mexico, did business in the United States, and came from the country of Colombia. And I said, tell me, as a businessman, what are the differences that you notice between American culture and Mexican culture? He said, well, American culture, it seems as if what you believe in is fashion. You can go 4 or 8 years of an administration that doesn't give a shit about their children or their grandchildren or the future or the infrastructure, followed by 8 years of an administration that's exactly the opposite. It's just like fashion. He said, in Mexico, no, traditional. You can always count on people fundamentally behaving and believing the same way that they did. And he would say, for instance, in Mexico, if he wanted to organize a meeting in his company come Monday and it was Friday, in the States, you say, meeting 10 o'clock Monday morning. Yes, sir. In Mexico, well, my family may be coming into town. You see, I can't quite, they will not make that kind of firm commitments that we're used to. And that shows in when you show up to a party, when you show up to a wedding. These are deeply traditional, and a sweetness. Now, I don't know what the recipe for that sweetness is historically or in other ways, but you can find it in almost every Mexican. And now that there's so many Mexicans in New York City, you can feel it in New York City. Whenever you go into a store, there's very often an Hispanic behind the counter, whether he's serving you a bagel, or he's a waiter at a French restaurant. And that's a wonderful, wonderful quality.